The chains around his wrists were cold, not the kind of cold that came from metal sitting in a room. This was a deeper cold, like the chains themselves wanted him to know he did not belong here. Ethan Voss stood in the middle of the largest courtroom he had ever seen. The walls were made of living crystal, pale blue and shimmering, stretching so high above him that they disappeared into shadow. Every surface hummed with a faint vibration, as if the room itself was breathing. Thousands of seats rose in circles around him, filled with creatures he had only read about in academy textbooks. Insectoid beings with razor-sharp limbs. Tall, thin figures made of something that looked like bark and moss. Reptilian species with scales that shifted color when they moved. All of them looked down at him with the same expression. Disgust. Ethan was a cartographer. He made maps. He charted dead moons, empty asteroid fields, and the quiet spaces between stars where nothing interesting ever happened. He was not a soldier. He was not a diplomat. He was a 32-year-old man who liked black coffee and old music and the sound of his ship's engine when it was running smooth. He was nobody. And yet here he was, standing in the celestial tribunal of Valkyr Prime, accused of crimes that carried the death penalty. High Adjudicator Selivan sat at the highest point of the chamber. She was Quarith, an insectoid species that had been part of the galactic community for longer than most stars in this sector had existed. Her body was covered in dark green plates of natural armor, and her 4 eyes reflected the crystal light like black mirrors. When she spoke, the entire room fell silent. "The human Ethan Voss is charged with 3 crimes," she said. Her voice was sharp, like the sound of 2 stones grinding together. Trespassing in the forbidden cradle, desecrating the sacred world of Ethira, and theft of a divine artifact belonging to the Galactic Covenant. Ethan looked down at his left arm. The thing was still there. A gauntlet made of crystal and light fused to his skin from his fingers to his elbow. It was warm, always warm, and it glowed with a soft white pulse that matched his heartbeat. He had not asked for it. He had not even known what it was when he found it. "I would like to speak," Ethan said. Selivan's 4 eyes narrowed. "You will have your chance, but first the tribunal will hear the charges in full." A Sirvan prosecutor stepped forward. He was reptilian, tall, with deep blue scales and a voice that sounded like silk being torn. He told the court that Ethan's exploration vessel, the Wayfinder, had been detected inside the Forbidden Cradle, a quarantined region of space that had been sealed for over 40,000 cycles. No species was allowed inside. The quarantine was the oldest law in the Covenant, and breaking it was the highest crime. Ethan had landed on Ethira, the dead world at the center of the cradle. Ethira was sacred to every species in the galaxy. It was the mythological birthplace of civilization itself, the place where the first people had risen, built their great works, and then vanished. The surface was a tomb, and the human had walked on it like a tourist. And then he had entered the vault, the most sacred site in the galaxy, and he had taken the arm of Ethira, the weapon of the first arbiter, the mythological figure who had brought law and justice to the stars. An artifact so holy that most species considered even speaking its name a serious matter. The prosecutor turned to Ethan and said, "The punishment for any one of these crimes is death. You are charged with all 3. Murmurs filled the chamber. Ethan could feel the weight of 10,000 eyes on him. "May I speak now?" he asked. Selivan waved one of her sharp limbs. "Speak." Ethan took a breath. "My jump drive failed. I did not choose to enter the Forbidden Cradle. My ship's navigation system crashed during a routine jump, and I was dumped into the quarantine zone. I had no idea where I was until I checked my star charts manually." "And yet you landed on Ethira," the prosecutor said. "Because I detected a signal, a pulse. It was coming from the surface, and my instrument said it was a distress beacon. I am a Covenant-registered explorer. I am required by law to respond to distress signals, so I landed." "And the vault?" Ethan hesitated. This was the part no one believed. The door opened for me. I did not force it. I did not hack it. I walked up to it and it opened. And the thing inside this gauntlet, it jumped onto my arm before I could react. I have tried to remove it. It will not come off. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Not kind laughter. The sound of powerful beings amused by something small and foolish. A Quarith counselor in the upper seats leaned forward. Ethan did not know his name yet, but he would learn it soon enough. Counselor Methys. His armor was darker than Celevan's, almost black, and his eyes held no amusement, only calculation. The human asks us to believe, Methys said loudly, that the most sacred artifact in our history chose a member of a species that has been traveling the stars for barely 300 years. A species of children, a species that still fights wars over patches of dirt on their homeworld. He paused. The vault did not open for him. He broke in. He stole the relic, and he should die for it. The chamber erupted in agreement. Voices from a dozen species called for the sentence to be carried out immediately. In the gallery, far from the main floor, Ambassador Dralith watched in silence. He was Sirvan, like the prosecutor, but older, with faded gray scales and tired eyes. He had worked with humans for 20 years. He knew them better than most aliens in this room. And he knew, with a quiet certainty that sat heavy in his chest, that Ethan Voss was telling the truth. But truth did not matter here, not today. The tribunal voted. The result was unanimous. Guilty on all charges, execution at dawn. The guards grabbed Ethan's arms and pulled him toward the exit. He did not fight. There was no point. But as he was dragged through the great crystal doors, the gauntlet on his arm pulsed once, a single, blinding flash of white light that filled the entire chamber. Every crystal in the walls hummed. The sound was deep and old, like a bell that had not been struck in 40,000 years. The walls, which had recorded every verdict in the history of the tribunal, shuddered. Every being in the room felt it, a vibration in their bones, a whisper in a language none of them knew. High Adjudicator Celevan sat perfectly still. In all her centuries on the bench, she had never seen the walls react to anything. They were passive. They recorded. They did not respond. Until now. She said nothing. The guards took Ethan away. In his cell, alone in the dark, Ethan sat on the cold floor and stared at the gauntlet. It was warm. It pulsed gently, like a second heart beating against his skin. And then in the silence he heard a voice. It was not loud. It was not human. It was old, older than anything he had ever imagined, and it carried a weariness that stretched across ages. It said one word. Finally. Ethan closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He did not think he would ever sleep again. But for the first time since the chains had closed around his wrists, he felt something strange and unexpected rise in his chest. It was not hope. It was not courage. It was the feeling that something very large and very patient had been waiting for him, and now, at last, it had found what it was looking for. The voice came again in the deep hours of the night, when the station's lights dimmed to simulate a cycle of rest that no one in the holding cells ever actually experienced. "You are afraid," the voice said. It was not a question. Ethan sat with his back against the cold wall. The gauntlet on his arm gave off a faint glow, just enough to push back the darkness around him. He looked at it and said, "Yes." "Good. The ones who are not afraid are never the right ones." "Who are you?" Ethan asked. "I am not a who, I am a what." The voice paused, as if choosing its words carefully. "I am the adjudication protocol. I was built by the first people of Ethyra, the civilization that came before all others. They created me to serve a single purpose, to ensure that justice could never be owned by the powerful." Ethan flexed his fingers inside the gauntlet. The crystal moved with him like a second skin. And the gauntlet. The arm of Ethyra. It is my interface, my connection to the physical world. Without a bearer, I am dormant, a mind without a body. I have been sleeping for 40,000 cycles, waiting inside the vault for someone to open the door. Why me? The protocol was quiet for a moment. When it spoke again, its voice was softer. The vault does not open for the powerful. It does not open for the wise or the ancient or the famous. It opens based on a single measurement that I was designed to detect. What measurement? The willingness to do what is right when there is nothing to gain from it and everything to lose. Ethan let out a short, bitter laugh. I am a cartographer. I make maps of empty space. I am not some hero. The first arbiter was a mapmaker too, the protocol said. Before she became the one who brought law to the stars, she drew charts of river systems on a world that no longer exists. Justice is cartography, Ethan. It is the act of drawing a line between what is and what should be. You have been drawing that line your entire life. You simply did not know it had a name. Ethan wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. He thought about the mine collapse on Theta Station when he was 24, the alarm screaming, everyone running out, and him turning around and going back in because he could hear voices calling from the lower tunnels. He pulled 3 strangers out of the rubble that day. He never told anyone. There was no reason to tell anyone. He thought about the navigation report he filed against his own captain 2 years later. Captain Hendricks had been falsifying jump coordinates to save fuel and pocket the difference. Ethan reported him, knowing it would end his posting on the best ship he had ever served on. It did. He spent the next year mapping asteroid dust in the outer reaches, alone, while Hendricks' friends made sure no good assignments came his way. Small things, invisible things, the kind of choices that nobody noticed and nobody rewarded. I scanned your memories when we bonded, the protocol said, as if reading his thoughts. Every moment, every choice. You are not perfect. You have been selfish and frightened and unkind. But when it mattered, when the cost was real and the reward was nothing, you chose correctly. That is enough. That has always been enough. Ethan pressed his forehead against the wall and breathed. Far from the holding cells, in a private chamber on the diplomatic level of the station, Ambassador Drelith was not sleeping either. He sat at a console, scrolling through data logs he had spent the last 6 hours obtaining through a combination of official requests and unofficial favors. The jump drive failure that had sent Ethan into the forbidden cradle. Something about it had bothered Drelith from the beginning. Jump drives did not simply crash during routine jumps. They were the most reliable technology humans had. The failure rate was 1 in several million. He pulled the maintenance records for the Wayfinder. The ship had been serviced at Kavan Station 3 days before the jump. Standard work. Fuel cells, hull inspection, navigation calibration. But buried in the service log was a small entry, a firmware update to the jump drive's navigation module, performed by a technician whose identification codes traced back to a shell company registered on a Quarith commerce world. Drelith followed the trail. The shell company was owned by another company, which was funded by a trust, which was administered by a legal office that had performed work for exactly 1 client in the last decade. Counselor Methys. Drelith sat back in his chair and felt the cold weight of understanding settle over him. The trial was not justice. It was theater. Methys had sabotaged the Wayfinder's jump drive, sent Ethan stumbling into the forbidden cradle, and then used the incident to put a human on trial before the galaxy. The point was never about the relic or the vault. The point was to humiliate humanity, to remind the younger species of their place. He dug deeper. Methys had been busy over the past several years. Quiet meetings with military leaders from 3 elder species. Proposed trade restrictions targeting younger civilizations. Draft legislation that would strip voting rights from species with fewer than 1,000 years of spaceflight. And buried deepest of all, hidden behind layers of encryption that Drelith almost missed, military deployment plans. Troop movements. Target lists. Colony worlds, human colony worlds. Drelith's hands shook. This was not politics. This was preparation for conquest. He gathered everything he had and went to the tribunal's administrative office to file an emergency motion. The clerk, a small, nervous creature with too many eyes, looked at his evidence and then looked at him with something like pity. "The trial is concluded, Ambassador. The sentence has been passed. Emergency motions require authorization from the High Adjudicator or a majority of the Tribunal Council. Then take it to the High Adjudicator." The High Adjudicator has retired for the evening and is not accepting petitions until after the execution. Dralith tried the council. Methi's allies, and there were many, blocked him at every turn. Procedural objections, jurisdictional questions, requests for additional documentation. They buried him in process, and process was a grave that nothing ever climbed out of. He returned to his chamber and sat in the dark, thinking about a human man in a cell below him, waiting to die for a crime that had been designed for him before he ever left port. In the holding cell, Ethan asked the protocol the question that had been building inside him since the gauntlet first spoke. What does the arm actually do? It does not fight, the protocol said. It does not destroy. It does not kill. It reveals. In the presence of the arm, no lie can survive. No corruption can hide. No unjust verdict can stand. I was designed to be the one thing that power cannot defeat, the truth. That is a weapon, Ethan said quietly. Yes, the most dangerous one ever made. And there is something else. A mechanism built into the tribunal itself, encoded into the crystal walls of this very station. It is called the Right of Revelation. It is old, older than the current covenant. The modern species have forgotten it exists, but it is still there, written into the bones of this place. What does it do? If the bearer invokes it, the tribunal must submit to absolute truth. Every judge, every accuser, every witness, their secrets, their motives, their hidden crimes are all laid bare before every living being watching. Nothing is spared. Nothing is hidden. Ethan felt something cold move through him, and the bearer. The bearer is exposed as well. Every failure, every shame, every moment of weakness. The right of revelation does not protect its user. You will stand naked before the galaxy, Ethan. Everything you are, everything you have ever been. The cell was very quiet. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, and beneath it, the steady pulse of the gauntlet. If I do not do this, I die in the morning. Yes. And if I do this, the truth comes out, all of it, theirs and mine. Yes. Ethan thought about the mine, the navigation report, the long years of being punished for doing the right thing. He thought about every person who had ever told him that honesty was a weakness, that the smart move was to keep his head down, that the universe did not reward people who stood up. Teach me the words, he said. The protocol taught him, ancient words in a language that no living mouth had spoken in 40,000 cycles. They tasted like starlight and ash. Dawn came. The guards appeared at his cell. Ethan stood and walked toward them. He did not resist. The gauntlet on his arm blazed like a white sun, so bright that the guards stepped back and shielded their eyes. In the gallery above the execution chamber, Dralith watched Ethan walk in. The human's face was calm. Too calm. His eyes held something that Dralith had seen only a few times in his long life. The look of a person who had made peace with what was about to happen, not because they had given up, but because they had chosen something bigger than survival. What is he doing? Dralith whispered to no one. The arm of Ethira burned white against the dark crystal walls, and the ancient station held its breath. The execution chamber was the oldest room on the station. It sat at the very bottom of the tribunal, carved from a single piece of crystal that had been shaped 10,000 years before the current covenant was founded. The ceiling was open to the stars through a transparent dome, and the light of the dying sun that Valkyr Prime orbited poured in like liquid gold. Every seat was filled. Representatives from all 12 elder species occupied the upper rings. Diplomats, Military officers, journalists, and observers from 100 worlds filled the lower galleries. The Galactic Broadcast Network carried the proceedings to billions of screens across known space. This was not just an execution. It was a message. Ethan Voss walked into the chamber without chains. The guards had tried to restrain him, but the gauntlet had grown warm. And every set of restraints they placed on him simply fell open. They had given up and let him walk freely, keeping their weapons trained on his back. He stood in the center of the chamber, on a circular platform of dark crystal. High Adjudicator Sullivan looked down at him from her seat above. "Ethan Voss of Earth," she said, "you have been found guilty by unanimous verdict. The sentence is death. Do you have final words?" The chamber was silent. Billions watched. Ethan raised his left arm. The gauntlet blazed, and he spoke words that had not been heard in 40,000 cycles, words in the first language, the tongue of the civilization that had built this place before any of the elder species had learned to look at the stars. The sound that came from his mouth was not entirely his own. The protocol shaped the words through him, and they carried a resonance that went beyond sound. The crystal walls of the chamber vibrated. The floor shook. The dome above cracked along lines that had been invisible a moment before, and through those cracks, light poured, not sunlight, but something older and whiter and colder. "I invoke the right of revelation," Ethan said, and his voice carried to every corner of the station, to every broadcast receiver, to every screen on every world. Sullivan's 4 eyes went wide. She did not know what those words meant. No living being in the room did, but the station knew. The ancient systems that had been dormant beneath the crystal for longer than any recorded history recognized the invocation, and they responded. Every exit sealed, every broadcast locked open, no one could shut the signal down. The crystal walls, which had silently recorded every verdict for millennia, began to glow. Light moved through them like blood through veins, spreading from the chamber outward through the entire station. Counselor Methys rose from his seat. "What is this? Shut it down now." No one could. The revelation began. It started with Ethan. His life unfolded across the crystal walls like a projection made of light and feeling. Not just images, the chamber filled with the emotional weight of each memory, so that everyone present did not just see his life but felt it. They felt the boy on the colony world, 9 years old, holding his mother's hand as she coughed blood into a cloth. The colony's medical supplies had been delayed by a trade dispute between 2 elder species who were arguing over shipping rights. His mother died waiting for medicine that sat in a warehouse 6 light-years away. They felt the young man in the academy, alone most nights, studying star charts while his classmates formed groups that never seemed to include him. They felt his quiet loneliness and his stubborn refusal to let it make him cruel. They felt him turning back into the collapsing mine on Theta Station, running toward the screaming when every part of his body told him to run away. They felt the weight of the rubble on his back as he pulled 3 strangers to safety, and they felt the silence afterward, when no one asked how the survivors had gotten out and he never told them. They felt him sitting at a console, writing the report that would end his career, his hands shaking, his stomach sick with fear, pressing the send button anyway because the falsified navigation data would eventually kill someone if he did not. They felt the years after, the bad postings, the empty rooms, the long stretches of silence in deep space where no one called and no one cared. And they felt the thing beneath all of it, the stubborn, aching, unbreakable thread that ran through his entire life. The belief, never spoken aloud, that doing the right thing mattered even when no one saw it, even when it cost everything, even when the universe gave nothing back. The chamber was silent when his life finished playing across the walls. 10,000 beings sat in their seats and not one of them spoke. Many of them had expected to see a criminal, a thief, a trespasser. They saw a man, just a man, small and scared and imperfect, and utterly, stubbornly decent. Then the revelation turned outward. The judges came first. Their private communication, their backroom agreements, their quiet compromises appeared on the walls for all to see. Trade deals that favored elder species at the expense of younger ones. Membership applications from developing civilizations that were denied on manufactured pretexts. Resources taken from worlds that had no voice in the covenant and no power to resist. It was not dramatic evil. It was the slow, ordinary corruption of beings who had held power for so long that they had forgotten what it was for. Small betrayals, repeated across centuries, until the system itself was rotten. And then the walls turned to Counselor Methys. His secrets did not come gently. They erupted across the crystal like a wound opening. The sabotage of the Wayfinder, the manufactured trial, the conspiracy that stretched back decades, a network of hardline politicians and military officers from 3 elder species, working together to systematically dismantle the rights of younger civilizations. Trade restrictions designed to cripple developing economies. Intelligence operations aimed at destabilizing human colonies. And at the center of it all, military plans for a slow, quiet campaign of annexation that would swallow human space within a generation. It was not a war plan. It was worse. It was a plan to make humanity disappear so gradually that the galaxy would barely notice until it was done. Methys screamed. He stood in his seat and screamed, and his voice was nothing like the smooth politician who had called Ethan a child in the first trial. This was the sound of a powerful being watching his world collapse. "Lies," he shouted. "The artifact is corrupted. It shows what the human wants it to show." But the walls did not lie. They had never lied. Every being in the room knew this, because the walls had recorded every true verdict for longer than civilization had existed, and they had never once been wrong. Methys turned to his guards. "Kill him, kill the human now." The guards moved forward, but the light from the arm of Ethira filled the chamber, not with force, not with violence, but with something that no weapon could match. Every being in the room felt it in their chest, in the deepest part of themselves. The truth, not as an idea but as a physical force, a weight, a gravity that held them in place. They could not move against it, not because they were physically restrained, but because something inside them, something older than politics and deeper than fear, recognized the light for what it was. It was justice itself, raw and undeniable, and no one could raise a hand against it. The crystal walls began to change. The words of Ethan's guilty verdict, carved into the living stone, dissolved. New words formed in their place, written in the first language. The station's ancient systems, awakened for the first time in 40,000 cycles, issued their own judgment. The translation appeared on every screen across the galaxy. The bearer is recognized. The accused is innocent. Let those who perverted justice stand in his place. Tribunal security moved, not toward Ethan, toward Methys and his allies. They went quietly, most of them. The fight had gone out of them the moment their secrets touched the light. High Adjudicator Sullivan stood slowly. Her 4 eyes were wet. Ethan had not known that Quorith could cry. She looked down at him, and for a long moment, the most powerful judge in the galaxy and the human cartographer simply looked at each other. "I was not part of his conspiracy," she said, and the walls confirmed it. Her record was clean of Methys's plotting. "But I allowed political pressure to influence this trial. I did not seek the truth because seeking it was inconvenient." She removed the symbol of her office from her chest and set it on the bench before her. I stepped down. The chamber erupted, voices from every species, shouting, arguing, crying. The sound was enormous, and it filled the crystal dome and spilled out into the stars. Ethan did not hear any of it. He was on his knees. The revelation had taken everything from him, every wall he had built around his pain, every scar he had hidden, every private moment of weakness. He was empty, hollowed out, exposed to the bones before every living being in the galaxy. Ambassador Drelith pushed through the crowd and reached him. The old Sirvan knelt beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. Ethan was shaking. "Breathe," Drelith said softly. "Just breathe." The gauntlet dimmed but did not release. Against his skin, warm and steady, the protocol whispered to him. "You did well, bearer, but this was only the courtroom. The sickness in the Covenant goes deeper than one politician and his allies. There is more work to be done." Ethan closed his eyes. He was tired in a way he had never been tired before, not in his body, but in his soul. But he nodded, because the thread that ran through his life, the stubborn, unbreakable thread, was still there, still holding. It had always held. The galaxy did not sleep that night. The Revelation broadcast had reached every corner of known space. It played on screens in government halls and military command centers, and tiny apartments on colony worlds that most maps did not bother to name. Billions of beings watched the truth pour out of the crystal walls of the celestial tribunal, and when it was over, the silence that followed was louder than anything any of them had ever heard. Then the silence broke, and the galaxy began to scream. On human worlds, people filled the streets, not in anger, not yet, but in shock. They had watched one of their own stand naked before the universe, every failure and every quiet act of goodness laid bare, and they had watched as the beings who ruled the galaxy were stripped of their masks in return. The conspiracy Methys had built was not just a threat to humans. It was proof that the system they all lived under had been broken for a very long time. The younger species reacted fastest. The Keth, an amphibious people who had joined the Covenant only 4 centuries ago, called an emergency assembly of the Minor Species Caucus, a group that had existed for years but had never been taken seriously. The Draj, beings of living silicon who communicated through vibrations in stone, sent a message that translated simply as, "We always knew, now you know too." Within a day, 73 younger civilizations had signed a joint declaration calling for the complete reform of the Galactic Covenant. The elder species fractured. Some were horrified. The Ilvari, the ancient tree-like beings who had been part of the Covenant since its earliest days, issued a public statement acknowledging that they had allowed systemic corruption to grow while they looked away. Their eldest speaker, a being so old that her bark had turned to stone, said, "We are the roots, and the roots have rotted. This human showed us what we refused to see." Others were not so generous. Among the Quarith, Methys's arrest had split the political class in two. Half demanded accountability. The other half called the revelation a human trick, a weapon disguised as truth, designed to humiliate the elder species and seize power. 3 Sirvan military fleets declared a state of emergency in their home territories, not because of any external threat, but because they were afraid. Afraid of what would happen if the younger species decided that truth was enough to tear the old order down. Ethan saw none of this. He lay in a medical bed aboard the human vessel Constant, which had been docked at Valkyr Prime for diplomatic purposes and was now the only safe place for him in the sector. The doctors said he was physically fine. The gauntlet had not harmed his body, but his vitals told a different story. His heart rate was too fast. His sleep was filled with nightmares. He stared at ceilings and did not speak for hours. The revelation had cost him something that medicine could not measure. Every wall he had ever built around his pain had been torn down in front of the galaxy. His mother's death, his loneliness, his fear, the private, shameful moments of weakness that every person carries and never shows to anyone. All of it was gone. All of it belonged to the universe now. He was the most famous human alive, and he had never felt more hollow. Ambassador Drelith visited him every day. The old Sirvan did not push him to talk. He sat in the chair beside the bed and read reports on his datapad, and sometimes he said things out loud, political updates, news from the Covenant Assembly, gossip about which elder species diplomats were trying to save their careers. He spoke as if Ethan were listening, even when Ethan gave no sign that he was. On the fourth day, Ethan spoke. "They all saw," he said. Drelith put his datapad down. "Yes." "Everything." "Yes." Ethan turned his head and looked at the Sirvan with eyes that were red and tired. "How do you live after that, when everyone knows everything about you?" Drelith was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think you stopped pretending, and I think that might be easier than you expect." The protocol spoke to Ethan that night, when the medical bay was dark and the ship hummed around him. It spoke gently, the way it always did when it could feel his pain. "Every bearer has carried this weight," it said. The first arbiter wept for 3 days after her first revelation. She said it felt like being turned inside out. But she also said that afterward she was lighter, because the things we hide from others are heavy, and truth, even painful truth, is lighter than the secrets we carry. "I am not the first arbiter," Ethan said. "No, you are Ethan Voss, and that is who was needed." A week after the revelation, the political situation became dangerous. A coalition of hardline elder species, military factions from the Sirvan, the Quarith, and a third species called the Nithrak, whose vast mineral wealth funded much of the Covenant's infrastructure, issued a formal ultimatum. It was addressed not to Ethan personally but to the human government. Surrender the Relic to the Galactic Covenant for safekeeping and study. Failure to comply within 30 standard days would result in economic sanctions against all human territories and the potential authorization of military action to retrieve the artifact by force. The human government was terrified. They were a young species with a small fleet and a handful of colony worlds. The idea of going to war with the elder species was unthinkable. Several human politicians publicly called for Ethan to give up the relic. Drelith brought the news to Ethan's bedside. He did not soften it. Ethan deserved the truth. He had paid enough for it. Ethan sat up in bed for the first time in days. "Can I give it up?" "That is what they are demanding." Ethan looked at the gauntlet. "I am asking you, can I remove it?" The protocol answered, "The bond is not a cage. If you truly wish to release me, I will go dormant. I will return to the vault and wait, but I must tell you what that means. Without a bearer, I cannot function. The Court of Stars cannot be restored. The truth has no voice. And the beings who want me locked away will ensure that no one ever reaches the vault again. It could be another 40,000 cycles before another bearer is chosen. Perhaps longer, perhaps never. And if I keep it, then we go forward together." Ethan thought about the ultimatum. He thought about his colony worlds, his people, the small and fragile human civilization that had only just begun to find its place among the stars. He thought about what would happen if he handed the relic over, the corruption, the quiet conquest, the slow erasure of every species that did not have the power to resist. He got out of bed. Drelith watched him stand, unsteady but upright, and saw something change in the human's face. The hollowness was still there. The pain had not gone away, but beneath it the thread had held. The stubborn, aching, unbreakable thing that the relic had seen in him from the beginning. "I will not give it up," Ethan said, "but I will not hide either." He recorded a message and broadcast it on every channel available to him. He spoke simply, in the plain language of a man who had nothing left to hide. "My name is Ethan Voss. You have seen who I am, all of me. I am not a leader, I am not a warrior, I am a mapmaker. But I carry something that belongs to all of us, and I will not hand it to the people who want to bury it. I am going to Ethira, the cradle, the place where it all began. I am going to open the Court of Stars, the place where justice was born, and I am going to give every species in this galaxy the one thing we have all been denied: a fair system, a true system. If you want justice, come with me. If you want to stop me, you know where I will be." He closed the broadcast. Within hours, ships began to move. A dozen human vessels, a Keth flotilla, 3 Draj carriers humming with deep vibrations that sounded like song, 2 Ilvari peacekeeping cruisers, crewed by beings who were older than most governments who had heard the call and recognized it. And behind them, assembling in the dark spaces between stars, the largest military armada gathered in 10,000 cycles. Admiral Voketh of the Sirvan High Command, Dralith's own countryman, a decorated soldier with cold eyes and colder principles, had been given command of the coalition fleet. His orders were simple: stop the human, retrieve the relic, use whatever force was necessary. Ethan's small fleet made the jump toward the forbidden cradle. The Wayfinder led the way, its hull still scarred from the journey that had started all of this. In the quiet of the cockpit, Dralith sat beside Ethan and said, "You know they will follow us." "I know. They have enough firepower to destroy a planet." "I know. Do you have a plan?" Ethan looked at the gauntlet. It pulsed, warm and steady like it always did, and the protocol said softly so that only he could hear, "The first arbiter faced an army too. She did not fight them. She made them see." Ethan said, "Something like that." The stars stretched into lines, and they were gone. Ethira was not what he expected. From orbit it looked dead. Gray continents stretched beneath thin clouds, and the oceans had dried to salt flats that glittered under the light of a pale yellow sun. There were no signals, no energy readings, no signs of life. Just a world that had been silent for 40,000 cycles, waiting in the dark like a held breath. But when the Wayfinder descended through the atmosphere, Ethan saw the ruins. They covered the planet. Cities that stretched from horizon to horizon, built from a material that looked like stone but was not stone, something smoother, something that still held its shape after millennia of wind and rain and silence. The architecture was impossible. Towers that curved like living things. Bridges that spanned canyons without any visible support. Streets that spiraled in patterns that hurt the eye if you looked at them too long, as if they had been designed for beings who understood geometry in ways that no modern species did. And at the center of the largest continent, surrounded by a ring of mountains that looked almost too perfect to be natural, stood the Court of Stars. It was an amphitheater open to the sky, carved into the rock of the planet itself. Seats rose in vast concentric circles, thousands upon thousands of them, enough to hold representatives from every species in the galaxy. At the center was a raised platform, the Arbiter's dais, and on it sat a single stone chair, simple and unadorned. Ethan landed the Wayfinder on the plain outside the court and walked the rest of the way on foot. Dralith walked beside him. Behind them, the ships of their small coalition settled onto the ancient landing fields, and their crews stepped out onto ground that no living being had touched in recorded history. The air smelled like dust and something else, something clean and sharp, like the air after a lightning strike. Ethan felt it on his skin, in his lungs, in the gauntlet that pulsed faster with every step he took toward the dais. He climbed the steps. He stood before the stone chair, and he placed his hand on it. The planet woke up. It did not happen violently. There was no earthquake, no explosion, no dramatic surge of power. Instead, there was light. Soft, warm, white light that rose from the stone beneath his feet and spread outward like water filling a dry riverbed. It flowed through the streets of the dead cities. It climbed the towers. It filled the amphitheater until every seat glowed gently, as if inviting someone to sit down. And then the broadcast systems activated. Technology that was older than any living civilization hummed to life beneath the surface of Ethira, and the Court of Stars appeared on every screen, every datapad, every display on every world and station and ship in the galaxy. The signal was stronger than anything modern technology could produce. It could not be blocked. It could not be jammed. Every living being in known space saw the empty amphitheater, the glowing seats, and the human standing at its center with a gauntlet of crystal and starlight on his arm. Ethan spoke, his voice carried to the stars. This is the Court of Stars. It was built by the first people, the civilization that came before all of us, as a place where justice could live. It has been empty for 40,000 cycles. It has been waiting for us to be ready to use it again. He paused, the weight of billions of eyes pressed against him, but he held steady. I am not a judge, I am not a king. I am a cartographer from a small colony world, and I have no right to tell any of you how to live. But I carry the arm of Ethira, and it has shown me what this place was meant to be. Not a weapon, not a tool of power, a promise. The promise that truth is possible, that fairness is possible, that we can build something better than what we have. He looked directly into the broadcast, knowing that admirals and presidents and ordinary people on hundreds of worlds were watching. I am inviting everyone, every species, every leader, every citizen, come and see, come and decide for yourselves. 14 hours later, Admiral Voketh's fleet dropped out of hyperspace. 200 warships, the combined military power of 3 elder species, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet open like an egg. They took formation in high orbit above Ethira, and Voketh's flagship broadcast a single message. Human vessel, you have 30 minutes to surrender the artifact and evacuate the surface. Failure to comply will be treated as an act of war. Ethan did not respond. He stood at the dais and waited. 20 minutes passed. Voketh's weapons powered up, targeting systems locked onto the surface. And then the Ilvari arrived. 12 peacekeeping cruisers, ancient vessels with hulls of living wood and stone, dropped out of hyperspace and positioned themselves between Voketh's fleet and the planet. They did not arm their weapons. They did not raise their shields. They simply stopped, hanging in the void like ancient trees standing in the path of a flood. Their commander, an Ilvari elder whose name translated roughly as Deeproot, sent a single message to Voketh. We will not fire, but we will not move. More ships came. Keth patrol boats, Droj carriers that hummed with deep harmonic frequencies, a cluster of small human civilian vessels that had crossed half the galaxy in ships that were never designed for the journey. Even a squadron of Quorith cruisers, their crews in open defiance of their own government, who had seen the revelation and decided that truth mattered more than orders. Voketh's fleet was surrounded, not by enemies, not by weapons, by witnesses. On the surface, the court of stars waited. The seats glowed. The broadcast carried everything to the galaxy. Voketh sat in his command chair and stared at the tactical display. He was a soldier. He had spent his life understanding force, how to apply it, how to survive it, how to win with it. But force required an enemy, and the beings between him and the planet were not fighting. They were watching, and the entire galaxy was watching them watch. If he fired, he would not be defeating an enemy. He would be committing a massacre in front of every living being in known space, and every being in known space would remember. He did not fire. On the surface, the first shuttle landed. The Ilvari came first. Deeproot walked into the court of stars on root-like legs that had carried her for 3,000 years, and she took a seat in the amphitheater. She said nothing. She simply sat down. The Keth came next. Then the Droj, settling their heavy silicon bodies into seats that had been built large enough to hold them, as if the first people had known, even then, what shapes life would take. A group of humans arrived, not politicians, not soldiers, just people who had made the journey because they believed it mattered. Ethan stood at the dais and activated the court's final function. The protocol had explained it to him during the journey. The Court of Stars was not just a courtroom. It was a covenant engine, a system designed to create binding agreements between species based on complete mutual transparency. Every being who sat in the court could see the intentions, fears, needs, and hopes of every other being present. No masks, no politics, no hidden agendas, just the raw, uncomfortable, beautiful truth of what each of them wanted and what they were afraid of. It was terrifying, and it was the only way to build something real. Ethan went first, again. He opened himself to the court, and every being present felt what he felt, his exhaustion, his fear. his desperate, stubborn hope that this would work, his longing for home, his complete absence of any desire for power. He was exactly what he appeared to be, a tired man who wanted the galaxy to be fair. The Ilvari came next. Their ancient grief, their shame at having allowed corruption to grow, their deep desire to be the roots they were meant to be. Then the Keth, whose greatest fear was that their children would inherit a galaxy that had no place for them. Then the Draj, whose harmonic language could not express dishonesty and who had been waiting for centuries for other species to stop lying. One by one, species came to the court. The negotiations were raw, they were painful. Beings said things they had never said aloud. Admitted fears they had never acknowledged, named injustices they had committed and injustices they had suffered. There was anger, there was grief, there was, in moments, something close to understanding. Admiral Voketh was the last. Dralith went to him personally. He took a shuttle to the flagship and stood in Voketh's quarters, the quarters of a fellow Sirvan, a fellow soldier, a being he had once respected. "We built something wrong," Dralith said. "We told ourselves it was strength and it was just fear. Fear of the young, fear of change, fear of losing what we had." Voketh stared at him. "If I go down there, everything I am will be exposed." "Yes. Every order I followed, every colony I watched suffer because the High Command said it was not our concern." "Yes." Dralith met his eyes. "And you will see that I have done the same. We all have, but the only way out is through. Come down, Voketh. Let them see that we can be better." Voketh descended. His truth was hard. A lifetime of obedience to a system he had known was unjust. Moments of cruelty. Moments of mercy that he had hidden from his superiors because mercy was considered weakness. And beneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion with the lie he had been living, the lie that power was the same thing as right. The court held him. It held all of them. And in the transparency, in the raw and terrible honesty of it, something grew. Not trust, that would take years, but the beginning of trust, the seed of it, the first green shoot pushing through ash. The new covenant was written in the Court of Stars that day, a galactic charter of genuine equality, a rotating council of all species, elder and young, a permanent court, open to any being in the galaxy, where disputes would be resolved in transparency. The role of arbiter would not be held by one person or one species. It would rotate, chosen by the same criterion the Relic had always used: not power, not wisdom, not age, but the quiet willingness to do right when no one was watching. When it was done, they offered the title to Ethan, first arbiter reborn. He shook his head. "That is not mine to keep. The whole point is that it does not belong to anyone." He walked to the dais and placed his hand on the gauntlet. For a moment he felt the protocol one last time, warm, grateful, ancient, and finally at peace. "Thank you, Ethan," it said. "You drew the map, others will walk the road." The gauntlet released. It slid from his arm like water and settled onto the arbiter's dais, where it glowed softly, not dormant, not waiting, but ready. Ready for the next bearer and the one after that and all the ones who would come in the centuries ahead. Ethan flexed his bare hand. His arm felt light. His whole body felt light. He walked out of the Court of Stars, past the glowing seats and the beings who watched him go, past the ancient streets and the impossible towers, back to the plane where the Wayfinder sat waiting. The ship was small and scratched and unremarkable, and he loved it. Dralith caught up with him at the ramp. "Where will you go?" the old Sirvan asked. Ethan looked up at the sky. The stars were out, more of them than he had ever seen from any world, as if Ethira's thin atmosphere had been designed to let the light in. He smiled. It was the first real smile in a long time, and it changed his face completely. "I am a cartographer," he said. "There is a lot of galaxy left to map." He walked up the ramp. The engines hummed. The Wayfinder lifted off the surface of the oldest world in the galaxy, turned its nose toward the dark between the stars, and jumped. Behind him the Court of Stars shone, a beacon, visible from orbit, visible from space, visible if you knew where to look from the far edges of the galaxy. A light that said, simply and without compromise, that justice was not a myth. It was not a weapon. It was not a birthright of the powerful or a gift from the ancient. It was a choice. It had always been a choice. And a human had reminded them of that.